Welcome to Spirit Shack TV. Tonight I'm speaking to you direct into my phone rather than using the camera and the tripod. I will say I am feeling exceptionally tired because of some spirit activity we had in our house last night, which I'll explain to you another day because it relates to a paranormal investigation that John, Luke and I will be doing on Friday in Christchurch in a private house. If you can hear some noise in the background, it's our fish tank Bubbles. Just say hello to our angelfish if you can see them there. There is Angel. And there's my favourite, little Scar. I hope you can see him quite clearly there. Tonight I want to just do a brief piece to you about the start of the 7 principles of spiritualism. Now, these are the building blocks, if you like, given to us through the mediumship of a lady called Emma Hardinge-Brittan, whose photograph will appear at the end. And she was inspired by her spirit guide, Robert Owen, who many of you in the UK will know as a great philanthropist and the founder of our cooperative movement, great socialist and social thinker of times gone by. And he was deeply committed when he was alive to this new belief, this new philosophy, this new freedom of thinking and of, if you like, religious practice, although it wasn't a religion that anybody had ever heard of at the time. And it was founded in the 1850s and started in the UK in a town called Keighley in Yorkshire, where the first spiritualist church was created and is still very much in use today. Emma Harding, as she was at the time, and then in latter years Emma Harding-Brittan, following her marriage, was a very great exponent of spiritualist thought and practice as a medium. And in the early days of this new belief structure, this new philosophy, science, religion and way of life that we call spiritualism, she would travel the length and the breadth of this country and in later years to the United States and to Canada and to various other places to expound upon the teachings that she had received and the philosophy that she understood, both through the influence of her spirit guides, one of whom, as I say, was Robert Owen, and in doing so she imparted that knowledge to as wide an audience as she possibly could. And I have often been inspired to follow in her example by being, if you like, a 21st century evangelist for our movement. Among the things that she was given by Spirit, including Robert Owen, were a set of principles, again, as still will appear at the end of this, which shows you them, which we now refer to in National Spiritualism as the 7 principles. We don't have dogma, we don't have creed like the traditional religions of the world, but we do have these principles, and these are principles for living in our physical life. And they're also principles that are followed when we move on from this life into the spirit realm. And they're very simple principles. And over this mini-series, I'm going to look briefly at each one. So just for a few moments, I'd like to share with you my understanding and my personal concept, and I will say it's my personal concept, on the first of those 7 principles, which is the Fatherhood of God. If you think back to the time in which Robert Owen gave these principles to Emma, it was in a time of great misogyny when we lived in a paternalistic society where men were supreme, yet ironically it was the women that led the growth of this movement, both the Fox sisters, Emma Harding-Brittan, and many, many other mediums philosophers and theosophists, to a lesser degree Madame Blavatsky, and in later days people like Helen Duncan, and I could ring off lists of the great female leaders of our movement, and it's only right that it should be so. There's no difference between man and woman in the world of spirit, but at the time there was very much a male-led leadership of the world, and particularly of the traditional religions, which is still very much the case these days, but only in recent years, of course, have we seen bodies like the Church of England, or relatively recent years in Methodism, or in the Baptist movement, or in the independent and Pentecostal movements of Christianity, in Messianic Judaism, or what we call more contemporary Judaism, or liberal Judaism, and in certain of the Islamic branches of their faith, in Sufism, etc., where women have a part to play equally as valid and as recognized as valuable as those of the men. But this principle was given off at a time when God was still largely seen as a little old man, not akin to Mr. Waddington of Monopoly fame, sitting on a cloud, dispensing thunderbolts of judgment with one hand and folding us all in his loving embrace in the other hand. Quite what he did with the third and the fourth hand, I'm not quite sure, but I think we'll leave that to the Hindus and the Sikhs. However, in spiritualism, we see this principle at the beginning of our 7 principles, the fatherhood of God, or if we put it in another way, the parenthood of God, or the creativity or the creative force of God. And many of us in spiritualism, myself included, do not see God in human form, which the traditional religions used as a simpler, personalized way in which ordinary folk could see the divine and creative power that is preeminent above everything else, because without that creative power there is no life, pure and simple. We know at the moment in Switzerland, in CERN and places around the world, a lot of scientific investigation and experiment is going on into the Higgs boson particle and trying to find what they call the God particle, the form of energy that can be taken back to the very beginning of time, not only on this planet, but in the universe, as the creative force, that element from which everything else has been created, has grown, and has developed over time. But in those days, we talked about the fatherhood of God, in as much as God was seen as the creative force behind everything else, and without that creative force, nothing existed. Now, to me, as I say, God is no longer, although I come from a traditional background where I did used to have a personal relationship with this quasi-human imagery of God. That is no longer the case. I now see God as the divine creative intelligence, the energy, the life force from which everything else has been developed. And like the Higgs boson particle that they're currently investigating in CERN and places like that, the very building block of our existence. But I do see, and this again I state is my personal belief, and there are spiritualists who have a more personal relationship with that image of God as a human form, be it a masculine form or a feminine form, or a mixture of the both, if you like. But for me, that energy has to exist before anything else can. And because that energy has to exist before anything else can, and that includes you, and that includes me, that includes our dogs, the fish that you've just seen, my chair, this bungalow, everything that exists, trees, plants, animals, whatever, without that creative force, nothing can exist. And therefore, to me, it makes common sense that that creative force is interwoven amongst everything that exists and has its being. Indeed, when we pray or we rely on those quasi-traditional beliefs of praying, which even I do today, and I will pray to that God force, I believe that although I am, especially when I'm in front of a congregation on a platform delivering a session of mediumship, or if I'm doing my rescue work, which you will see later this week in the most recent investigation that we're about to do, as I mentioned before, you will see me invoke prayers to that God essence, who I call the Father and Mother of all creation, of everything that lives, moves and has its being. And that's because that energy is interwoven through all of us. I believe that there is a spark of that divine power in each and every one of us, in every tree, in every plant, in every flower. As I said, everything that exists, moves and has its being. There are people who have religious belief. There are people of faith. There are people who are more spiritual but don't ally themselves to a particular single set of dogmas or creeds, or even to our principles in spiritualism, but nevertheless class themselves as spiritual. Then there are humanists. There are the Richard Dawkins of this world, who believe that when we die, that's it. Poof, we've gone in a moment of time. We existed for a moment of time, and then we're finished. Well, to me that makes no sense, but that's for another story one day, or another episode one day. We have to exist for a purpose. We can't just be here and then be gone. It seems pointless. And then there are those who absolutely steadfastly say that they would class themselves as atheists, and the humanists and the Dawkins of this world will classify themselves as atheists. But what is an atheist? An atheist is somebody, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, somebody who does not believe in a superior form of being, a higher intelligence, if you like. And I think that's largely based on the fact that the traditional religions have had such a hold on this concept of a God figure, or a God particle, a God energy, a God essence, whatever you wish to call it, over many, many centuries, many millennia, in fact, depending on whichever religion it may be. But if you don't believe in a higher intelligence, Professor Dawkins, surely you must be the supreme form of intelligence. But if you are the supreme form of intelligence, and I've heard you say that on a number of points, we are the highest point of knowledge and power that there can be, because we have the little ticky grey cells here, as Hercule Poirot would have said in Agatha Christie's books. There is nothing beyond us. QED, we are that supreme intelligence. We are that higher form of being. But you don't believe in that because you're an atheist. So, therefore, rather like the great Uzlan bird, and if you're a carry-on fanatic like I am, you'll know my reference to the great Uzlan bird. If you are the supreme point of being and the supreme intelligence, but you don't believe in a supreme intelligence, again, quod erat demonstrandum, QED, you must and disappear up your own rear end, because you've just said it doesn't exist. So how can you have that dichotomy at one point of saying there is no such thing as a supreme being, there is no such thing as a supreme form of intelligence or creative power, but then say in the next breath that you are it? It doesn't make sense to me. But what does make sense to me in this first principle is something that unites us together, in that we are all part of that divine essence, that divine energy and that divine power. Now, in closing, I would say that I believe that that divine essence, as I said before, flows through each and everything that lives, moves and has its being. And therefore we have a common unity that far transcends our physical and material ways of existing, our political beliefs, our social economic beliefs, our religious beliefs, and that's particularly evident at the moment with the problems we have around the world in the fighting within true Islam by that utterly repugnant group that call themselves the Islamic State, so-called, or IS, or Daesh, or whatever you particularly wish to call them as. To me, they cannot be in any way a form of Islam, for Islam is a religion of peace. And most of the religions of this world are a religion of peace. But spiritualism definitely is centered around peace and around unity and a concept of fraternity or sorority, brotherhood and sisterhood, united by that common thread, that fatherhood, that parenthood of God, the divine. And I'm going to look at that a little more in the next episode in this mini-series on the 7 principles, where I talk about the second principle, which is, in spiritualist terms, as given by Robert Owen to Emma Harding-Brittan back in the 1850s, known as the brotherhood of man. I prefer to call it the confraternity or sorority of all that exists. I hope you've enjoyed what I say. I hope it makes sense to you, and if it has done, sorry, my dinner has just arrived. It's been placed on my lap, so I'm going to have to call it a day now, as I enjoy what John has created for our evening meal. If you've enjoyed it, please hit like and subscribe and share and tell all your friends, because with your support we can get this message spread further and further afield. Those are my opinions on the 7 principles. Bless you all. Namaste. And may your God, as is my God, go with you. Until we meet again. Bye for now.